Welcome to the Repro Film Podcast. I'm your host, Asha Dyer, back with another thought-provoking conversation with some incredibly talented filmmakers who take us into the intersecting worlds of reproductive justice and the environment. The ways in which climate policies and environmental justice impact our ability to have control over our reproductive lives is a conversation that needs to be heard loud and clear, and I am thankful for the opportunity to use our platform to do so. In fact, there is no reproductive justice without climate justice. And many Black and brown women leaders have been talking about this for years, ever since the reproductive justice movement was founded in the early 1990s. Because marginalized communities are often located in areas with excess pollution and lack of access to clean air and water across the United States. Latricia Adams, co-founder of Black Millennials for Flint, an organization that focuses on work around lead exposure throughout the country, proposes an honest question regarding the fight for reproductive justice. She asks, if the womb, the first environment, is not protected, what is life? An article by the North Carolina Black Alliance outlines numerous harmful impacts that pregnant people are at risk of due to poor environmental health and contaminants. These can include lead exposure, which results in lower fertility rates and a higher risk of stillbirth. Fracking, which is connected to higher rates of preterm birth and congenital heart defects. PFAS chemicals, commonly found in drinking water, which can decrease fertility and increase blood pressure in pregnant people. And extreme heat and wildfire smoke, which lead to poor pregnancy outcomes. Now, since April 22nd is Earth Day, we thought we would focus on the issue of environmental justice by showcasing a powerful new short film called Black Madonna from filmmakers Morgan Jerkins and Zora Schiltz Rouse. Morgan is a New York Times bestselling author and National Magazine award-winning journalist based in New York City. Zora is a producer and director who has worked on FX shows for Ryan Murphy and currently works at the production company Color Force, whose new show Clipped will air on Hulu this June. Black Madonna stars Francesca Ramsey, who you may be following on social media already, as I am, as the main character Aziza, who is a climate justice activist living in a deteriorating neighborhood of Los Angeles. Aziza finds herself at a crossroads when she discovers she is pregnant. This film leaves the audience with so much food for thought when it comes to how the environment impacts our reproductive lives, coupled with the intersection of race and socioeconomic status. As Aziza has to grapple with her current situation, she also comforts a fellow climate activist who is struggling to get pregnant, alluding to the potential impact of a polluted environment on her fertility. I learned so much from Morgan and Zora, who are just a delight to talk to, not only around their advocacy on the environmental issue, but also art, creativity, and the reality of what it takes to make a film. It is a lot, y'all. If you are a social impact filmmaker or interested in any way about how the media and on-screen narratives play a role in challenging the status quo, trust me when I say this conversation is for you. Take a listen. Zora and Morgan, welcome to the Repro Film Podcast. It's so lovely to be speaking with you both today.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
You as well, Asha.
Well, Zora, I know you're in Paris as we speak, and I'm in LA. Morgan, where are you in LA?
I'm in New York.
Oh, in New York. So we're all in different locations. I love this. This is the beauty of being remote and doing podcasts. So thank you all for your time today. And before we dive into the film, I'd love to know how you both met and what made you decide to work together and make this film.
Zora and I met in Princeton. Oh man, God.
Is this going way back now?
I'm still reminding myself that like I'm in my 30s now. So I'm like, it was 10 years ago, but I'm like, it might have been 12 years ago. Yeah, so we met in Princeton. I was a student at Princeton and Zora, you were born and raised in Princeton, right?
I'm from Los Angeles originally, but my mom is at Princeton as a professor. So growing up in Princeton, I had a lot of friends that inevitably ended up at Princeton University.
Mhm.
And through mutuals, we randomly met. But
Mhm.
I don't think we I mean, it was in passing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so we ended up reconnecting because I moved out to LA in the summer of 2021. And Zora reached out to me because we were like social media Instagram mutuals. And then we hung out. So we went to Leimert Park and she was one of my first friends when I moved out to LA.
Yeah. That was a special day. And that we had, who was it that we saw? He passed away.
Michael K. Williams, RIP. Yeah. And he was very, very kind and it was a really nice day.
It was lovely. Yeah, that was special. Yeah, I had moved back from the East Coast to LA for work in February 2020. And so
What a time.
yeah, that was a terrible time to uproot and go across the country. But I don't know, I'd been following Morgan loosely on social media and seeing that she was local. I just felt really encouraged to like reach out and just say hi and ask her if she wanted to hang out. It felt very organic.
I love that. And you're both writers. You've both got experience in the film and TV world.
Zora has more experience than me in the film and TV world.
Yeah. And she has, I mean, an enormous amount of experience in the writing world that I do not have.
I'm so impressed. I'm blown away. I mean, both of you, all the things you've achieved, I'm like, this is going to be such a great conversation. So
Yeah, Morgan has done some extraordinary things. Do you want to touch on that? Well, I'm like,
yeah, please do. Morgan, tell us.
I'm really bad at magnifying myself. So I published my first book, This Will Be My Undoing, which was a personal essay collection in 2018. It became a New York Times bestseller. Since then, I've published two other books, Water in Strange Lands, which is like narrative nonfiction and family history, and also tinged with travelogues in 2020. Then I published my first novel in 2021. And I'm currently working on my fourth book, which is a novel right now. So I've been doing writing book wise. I've written on the internet since I graduated from college. So I've written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone. I've won 2 national magazine awards, and I was a Forbes 30 under 30 leader in media a couple of years ago.
That is so incredible. And just kudos to you. Like, those are huge achievements and they deserve their own bit of airtime in this podcast because I feel like as women as well, especially women of color, we always feel like we've got to achieve so much, but then we're not allowed to talk about it. So this is the space to do it and amplify your work.
Thank you.
So well done. I mean, a New York Times bestseller. Hello, that's huge. That's, that's amazing. So I love that. Well, tell me about the idea for Black Madonna. How did it come about? And also tell me about the significance of the title.
Yes. Okay. So, I was an editor at multiple publications before. I remember that, and I would see it at my job, and I would also read in my leisure time a lot of women that were wondering if it was ethical to bring a child into this world given global warming, and they were always white women, and that always bothered me, for lack of a better word, because I thought to myself, well, they're not the most susceptible to violence or erasure or lack of care. If anyone should be writing a lot of these stories, it should be Black and brown women. When I moved to LA, I lived on the west side of LA. I lived probably like right off Wilshire. I lived like 10 minutes probably from Santa Monica Beach. And I remember the apartment complex in which I was living, we had a rooftop and there was this Black man that was fortuitously up there while I was hanging out. And he was pointing to the mountains and he was trying to tell us about, how you can tell if a fire is about to happen. Like just randomly just giving us these tips. Whenever I would drive around LA, I started to notice like the difference. And I noticed it a little bit when I was living in New York City, where I'm based now. I mean, in Harlem, it could be 80 degrees and it can feel like 95. But then if you walk like 20 blocks south to Upper East Side near the Guggenheim, it feels so much cooler. There's less trash on the ground, there's more trees. And there was actually evidence that said that it is actually hotter in places where it's predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. I started thinking about LA in general, for example. Like if you're on the west side, you see a lot of parks, you barely see any trash, a lot of recreation. But then if you go towards like Long Beach and Vernon and Carson, all these other places, huge refineries, you can see them as soon as you're driving on the freeway. Like they're like these behemoth structures, Black people having like, and Black and brown people having these nicknames for certain towns and passageways in these towns that, they said this, you get asthma like being there. And I wanted to write a story about that. I wanted to write a story about, what would it be like to be in a world, but particularly in one's own world, where you're already at a disadvantage of in your life. And it has nothing to do with academics, has nothing to do with professional success. It's just literally breathing and how difficult that is. And what would it be like to bring in life into that or not? So, and in terms of I think you asked the title, because so my father's Catholic. And so I thought about like the Madonna's, like, the Virgin Mary, and it means, like motherhood. And I was like, I thought about several years ago when I went to Montserrat in Spain, which is a Benedictine monastery, and they had these Black Madonna statues there, which I never even knew that there was religious iconography of Black women. And so that really stayed with me because I thought, like, this is a story about Aziza, and she's just a regular girl, so to speak. But I think the cataclysmic influence of bringing life into this world as a Black woman is something that can't be understated. And in fact, it wasn't until post-production that I started to realize like what blackness signified when you're talking about the term Black Madonna. That blackness is considered fertility. It's not considered evil. It's considered a place of mystery. And it's a place of that brings forth things. And so that made the title feel even more like it was meant to happen on a cosmic level to title the short film that way.
Wow, I love that backstory to the title because it often holds so much significance that sometimes gets obscured by what we're seeing or different conversations. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think it's like at first I was worried because I was like, I'm worried that people are gonna think this is like a religious like there's religious subtext in this, which is not. I actually liked the juxtaposition that you don't know what religion Aziza is. You don't know where spirituality is. She's just a regular Black girl, but that is still powerful in and of itself because of all of these spiritual and immaterial implications on top of being pregnant.
Speaking of Aziza, I'm a huge fan of Francesca Ramsey, who plays your main character. I loved her nuanced performance in Black Madonna. Can you talk about the process of casting her and why she was drawn to the story? How did she say yes?
Yeah. So for me, like, I've always sort of navigated my career like where there's a will, there's a way, and all I have to do is ask. Zora and we put out calls to people to audition. I asked Francesca on a whim. Francesca and I have been social media mutuals for years, and Francesca's a comedian. Like, her career exploded because she did a video called Shit White Girls Say, and the rest was history. And I've always thought that comedians can make great dramatic. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but there's this short film that I'm working on. We're going to film this week. Would you be interested? And she said she'd audition, and she did, and then she got it. And me and Zora knew that like we wanted to cast her right after it was done. We learned like a week before filming, when we did the reading, that the story resonated with her in ways that we were not privy to when we asked her. But it's the same thing with her her counterpart Brandon Bell. Brandon Bell was on Dear White People, both the series and the film. I just DM'd him on Instagram. He did not follow me. I just said, listen, this is who I am. This is the film I'm working on. And a week or two later, his agent reached out to me. He's like, he'll do it. I'm still shocked to this day. It's definitely something I brag about more than probably a lot of my accomplishments. But I think it made me feel happy, not just for those two big names, but just for seeing the crew set up every single day at 7 o'clock in the morning and realizing that there are people that believe in the story, and that was really, really heartwarming.
And the casting is such an interesting the more I work in development, the more I can like I take the craft of casting so much more seriously. I was watching this movie recently by this Argentinian female director, and she apparently held auditions in her garage. I wish I knew her name. She held like auditions in her garage, and she saw upwards of 4,000 people for her small film. I think it won like a best picture at Sundance in like 2000. I think I underestimated how important getting like the perfect ensemble together was. I'm really proud of the group that we cast. I think they were great together, especially the leads. They're wonderful. Short films are all about shooting your shot, and Morgan shot the shot. And when she reached out to Brandon and Francesca, um, but it really is, it's really hard to find chemistry between actors. And like, I think in retrospect, I would have spent more time on casting. I really think it requires a lot of dedication, a lot of time. And like maybe working, yeah, just like doing chemistry reads, I think. I love who we cast, but I think in retrospect, I just wish I kind of spent more time thinking about what that ensemble was going to look like. Feeling really like really confident that we were hiring the right people. One thing that stood out to me and Morgan, well, we were chatting with some incredible actresses. Well, as the conversations continued, she and I recognized that like we would prefer to cast somebody who wasn't light skinned. I think that was a priority. As a light skinned person, I find I'm like, I'm always like kind of looking at who's being cast, who's like up and coming, who's popular. And that there's a lot of space in this industry for light skinned women. I don't know, I feel like it's like palatable to white studio executives. So I think somewhere in the casting process, we both decided that we needed to cast and represent differently. We needed to hire somebody who like didn't necessarily have our complexion. Yeah, somebody whose look was like true to the story and the area that we were like the geographical location that we were trying to convey. So that was important in the casting process. Other than that, there was a real learning curve.
I love that you talk about that intersectionality and the importance of casting and why you wanted to cast someone who had darker skin. And I'd love to talk about the intersectionality of the film in general. I mean, this is something we like to talk about at Repro Film as often as possible, that reproductive justice and reproductive health is not just about abortion and birth control. There are so many other factors involved, including environmental issues and how that impacts our ability to make these decisions. Can you both talk about those two intersections, making those reproductive decisions in an environment that is not healthy and isn't conducive to raising children in a healthy way?
I don't personally believe you can extricate environmental issues from reproductive issues because, for example, if a mother is drinking polluted water, what is that going to do to her system? What is that going to do to the system of the baby that she's housing? If she lives in an area where she can see noxious fumes being pumped into the air because of a nearby refinery, what is that going to do to her respiratory system? What is that going to do to her arteries, right? If she lives in a food desert, what is that going to do to her strength, right? All of these things matter. And I'll be honest with you, it's not something that I thought about, but I think that speaks to the privilege of that, right? Because I grew up in a suburban South Jersey neighborhood. I opened up my door and I could see a park. I always had, clean water. So it's being mindful and looking around, and also urban planning is connected to environmental justice and reproductive justice, because a lot of times you see Black and brown neighborhoods, as we shown in the film, they're not only polluted air wise, they're polluted noise wise. And that can also cause stress. That can also cause disorientation, right? That can also cause anxiety, which again is harmful to not just anybody, but particularly to pregnant women or women that are trying to get pregnant. So filming Black Madonna and even prior to Black Madonna, just location scouting was, it really made me become so aware of how cities are laid out, why certain structures are in certain neighborhoods and not in others, what type of deleterious effects are happening health-wise here, but not so much here. And the studies are out there. Like anything that we spoke about that Ziza speaks about, like that's all study. That wasn't just anything that we just pulled out imaginatively. Those were studies. And so that's just something that I feel like you can't divorce from one another, right? And even just, I mean, when Zora and I were trying to find like clinics to film in, we didn't end up filming a clinic, but trying to find a clinic in one part of town near downtown versus if you were to go again to the west side or something, it's night and day. Like it's just it's not the same.
You put that so well. I mean, it's something that we need to think about more, the nuance and the complex layers that, like urban planning, you put it so well, like who plans it, who is it planned for, and what are the benefits or lack of benefits for the people that live there.
Right. Like I live in Harlem, right? The modern architect of New York City is Robert Moses. Robert Moses created these highways, right? These highways and these interstates in New York City, and they cut through black neighborhoods. They cut through these enclaves. And the reason why, like early in the interview when I talked about lack of space with regards to trees, and it's different in the Upper East Side, which is right here, but it's not here. It's because of him. And that's why, I remember the first summer that I was in New York, I almost had a heat stroke because it was so hot. But then if I went to the park, if I went to Upper East Side, Upper West Side, it was completely different. The breeze just cut through the trees differently. And I knew, and I didn't know then, but I know now in retrospect that that was by design. It's not just because a city is just happened to arise organically. It was all by design.
It just really speaks to the idea of who's in leadership and what are those decisions that they're making. I want to talk about the filmmaking aspect for a moment. Before we started recording, Morgan, you said this is your first short film. I'd love to talk about, and Zora, you've worked a lot in film and TV and the entertainment world. I'd love to talk about what were the biggest challenges making Black Madonna for you both, and how are you navigating through those now as the film is going to be out in the world and as you share it.
There's so much freedom in this short filmmaking, like short form filmmaking, which is really fun and it's exciting. A lot of kind of guerrilla style work that you can do. But on the other hand, it's like, well, for me, my biggest struggle in pre-production was finding time to commit to kind of building this with Morgan, just because, like, of course, I was working the whole time we were in pre-production as Morgan was. That was a struggle just to balance just your own professional work with your creative work with like a 9 to 5. That was hard to find the time to do. So in pre-production, that was my biggest hurdle. I mean, every stage has its own difficulties, but that first part for me was a challenge. I remember I would have to I couldn't show up for a couple of like rehearsals or casting calls just because, in film you're working like 16-hour days. And that was tough to find that. Yeah, just it's hard trying to find time to work on your own creative stuff when you're beholden to other people's work. Yeah, I was working on a TV show at the time, it offers you no flexibility in terms of like there's very little time off. It's exceptionally long days for minimal pay, mostly. Yeah, what about you in pre-production specifically, Morgan? What were some of the challenges?
I was thinking more actual production. For me personally, I started my career working by myself. I was a one-woman machine. I underestimated, but kind of not, in terms of just the scale blew up for me because, I have a co-director. Now we have a whole like producers. Now you have crew. And I was not used to delegating in that way. You got to make decisions fast, right? And I think also during production, like I had to learn to put my foot down in a way that I'm not used to. Like I'm used to being from the journalism space. It is a collaborative process. Okay, let's table that. No, you can't do that. In fact, I remember our DP, Maricela, pulled me into a bathroom and was like, we have got to get moving. Like, in terms of budgeting, in terms of overtime, like you have to make an executive decision. Like you are the co-director, like your actors, everybody's gonna have an opinion about what, but you have to shut it down. And I am not used to that. And so that's where my challenge was production wise. I think I don't know, like this was a personal challenge, but this wasn't, no one ever complained. But I don't know if that's the issue, right? It's like Black Madonna cost 50,000 to make. It was funded by my parents. It's something that I cannot be more thankful to them about. Um, but even still, like when I'm seeing people get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and work 10, 11 days, 11-hour, 12-hour days, and they're only getting paid like 300 or 400, if that. I was like, damn, like all that work. And I know they liked it. They especially liked the food and the snacks and the beverages we gave them. But I was just like, man, I wish I could pay you 5 times more than this. Like, I wish I could do that. And again, like nobody complained, but it was like, it really made me think about I don't look at movies the same way. Like anytime I watch a movie, I'm thinking to myself, well, how much did it cost? How much did that movie cost to make? But then I'm also like thinking in my mind, man, like what were those people doing on that set? And how many hours a day did they have to work on that set? And how quick the turnaround had to be, So like I look at Dune, like when I watched the first Dune, it was $200 million. And I was like,
Insane.
I can't imagine like the delegation of crew here, there, filming it from this side, pivoting to that side. Like it has definitely made me more appreciative of the people that we don't see, but also just like still more spellbound and confused by just the nuts and bolts, pun intended, of making a film.
Well, speaking of June, well, sort of. Zora, before you were talking about getting the film out there, what it takes, you make this film, you put all this money and energy and work into it, but then the film is done. And then the next challenge begins, how to attract attention. Can you talk a little bit about that and getting people's attention about the film?
I think that's something that we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
We recently completed a re-edit of the short, and I think we're going to make a more concerted effort to get people's attention. And I think this being asked to get on this podcast or be on this podcast is, we're so grateful and lucky. And this is like, one of those opportunities where we can really showcase this film in a way that we didn't the first time around, because we had a previous edit that we submitted to festivals with some success. It was really wonderful. But I think this time around, Morgan and I are gonna, I don't know. I feel like I started an Instagram page for Black Madonna. I I think I was like a little squeamish to like ask for anybody's attention. I feel like I was kind of hesitant, but this time around, I think like I want to be a little more vocal. I want to be a little more clear with people that I think that they should watch this. I think it's in their interest to see what we've done.
The film industry has been through a lot, like just with the writer's strike and the actor's strike. I think that also sort of allowed us to take our time and to really process just in the film and just respectively of where this can go, where our careers could go. So yeah, I think it's like I'm still just like, this was a big deal. Like it wasn't just a small feat to do. And I think I need to stand in that.
Yeah, agreed. I think, and she and I were both based in New York now. And we were talking about putting a screening on, which I always think is important, just like, grab the attention of a local audience. And New York City is obviously like a fabulous place where You can meet lots of incredible artists and forge a kind of community that I have yet to see anywhere else. Yeah, I'm taking notes from other friends that have made a career out of doing shorts. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure it out. That's something that, we're gonna look at. And then also obviously the power of social media is like enormous. This whole thing was kind of, it was because of social media that we even like together, or we found our two leads. So that's something I'm trying to navigate. I mean, Morgan, I feel like you're pretty good on social media. You have a good presence. You know how to like interact, you know how to engage with your audience.
I started my career online, so it's like I call myself like the quintessential millennial writer. That's how my career got started. So yeah, I tend to be very savvy. But I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit hesitant to talk about filmmaker because I felt like my audience was gonna be like, oh my God, she writes, she edits, she's a professor, and now all of a sudden she's doing film. But it's like, well, you know what? Yeah, like you know all the things, and I need to just stand in that.
I love that you're talking about marketing before as well, how people assume when you make a film, studios throw all this money at you. I mean, for Dune, yes, on HBO, sure, but when you're making an independent short film, talk us through that a little bit, just challenge those assumptions that people may have about filmmaking.
Well, I mean, I have a friend of mine who's in entertainment law, and she was like, I don't know of any Black women that have their independent films funded by their parents. She was like, that just puts you in a very different bracket. I see the GoFundMe's, I see the Indiegogos. So it's like I don't take any of that for granted. It costs money. And granted, like Black Madonna could have been a one day thing. It could have, right? It could have just been one day. It could have cut this thing down. But I didn't want that. Like I already had to cut it down. Zora knows, like I had to go through so many edits to cut it down to the size that it was in terms of writing. Um, and I think that's the thing. It's like independent filmmaking, there's a lot more creativity, but things still cost money. There are people that do bartering and do things, you know, back and forth. But I was happy that, people know Zora, know they know me. And I was happy that, my first film, I was able to say that, like, because y'all don't know me, I don't know what I could barter with you for. And so I'm going to go the traditional way. And I have my parents to help. So that's something that, like I said, I don't take for granted. It's something I'm still processing. But yeah.
But the marketing thing, that's interesting. I mean, it's a whole industry in of itself. I mean, it is like this billion-dollar machine, particularly in Hollywood, It's like I mean, it's a craft. Just like I think I have such an appreciation for every department because we had to operate as all departments. So now to like understand, try to very quickly kind of wrap our heads around like, okay, what does this person in the industry do and how do we do that for ourselves? But yeah, marketing is really tricky. I would say like on a grassroots level, just like show your film, invite people locally. I think that's an interesting marketing tactic. But also, of course, we like, I submitted our film to a million festivals, and that was a great opportunity, getting into festivals and then meeting, like, seeing our work on the screen and then having people come up to us after the fact and just like really engaging with people. Really fun. And that's how I like to market things, I think. It's just really engaging one-on-one with the audience. Like there was this man that came up to me after Black Madonna played at a festival and he said, "So what happened? Like what did she do?" And I love that interaction. It felt so I was really, yeah, I felt that it was so personal and I don't know, it was like great to get that feedback in person from an audience member. So yeah. I think, yeah, engaging with people locally is fun.
Yeah, those personal connections. Well, speaking of what did she do, I love that in the film, Aziza is making the decision when she finds out she's pregnant, what is she going to do? And that is one of the core tenets of reproductive justice, the right to have a child and the right not to parent if you don't want to, and to be able to do that with community and safety and support and all the things that don't always exist in the United States right now. Why was it important to include that aspect of her personal story in this film? overall.
Why was it important to include a personal story in terms of,
Her ambivalence about whether she wants to give birth and whether she wants to raise a child in the environment that she lives in, which isn't healthy.
right? Because I think it's real. It's like, not everybody is excited when they see the two lines on the pregnancy test. Like, also, she's overworked. Like, she has a niece already who has respiratory issues. So does her grandmother. She lives in an apartment. It's hot all the time. She's not making as much as she wants to. And it seems like, only a small group of people in the community care about what's going on. So now she has this other stressor in her life. And so I wanted people to see that, this, like, see the stakes. And that's for any story that I write. There has to be stakes involved, right? But I like the way that I ended it with, like, we don't know what decision she makes, but the rainfall that happens demonstrates that seasons always change and things can turn around, as it did with her getting the fellowship. And that's why I wanted to make sure that I added that lightness too, because I didn't want it to see like, okay, this is girl, she just has all this, not necessarily trauma, but bad things happening to her. So yeah, like I just wanted to show that there's a lot in making this decision. And at the end of the day, regardless of what she chooses, that the film ends with her understanding that she's going to be okay.
I think in any of the conversations that I have with friends, like, and these conversations started popping up like my late 20s, is there's always I don't know any women, any friends who who aren't indecisive about the choice to become a mom or a parent. Everyone is into, like, I think there's a lot of indecision. And I know people that really strongly wanted to be parents. And even then they were still, they questioned whether or not it was the right decision, whether, like, they're looking at the state of the world, whether, like, the, climate or politics, and wondering if this was a good idea. I feel like this conversation, I feel like everybody's, even if you, like, very strongly want to be a parent, still considering, like, the world we live in, it's a difficult choice to make. Even if you have all the means in the world, it's still, it's complicated. My own parents, they very openly were like, we just didn't know. And I know this was like 30 years ago, but they were like, we just couldn't really figure, like, like, he didn't want them and I did, and I wasn't sure, and it wasn't going to be good for my career. Like, I think, like, it's just an interesting conversation. It's really nuanced. And I think it's, like, it was a fun conversation to have and put as short together, considering it's at the top of a lot of women's minds in their 30s.
And I think it's really important that we have those nuanced conversations. It's not such a black and white, like, oh, I'm pregnant, I'm going to have a baby. Or, there are so many factors that go into that. And the more that we can see the nuance, we can give people the respect and dignity to make their own autonomous choices about their bodies and their lives without assuming, you know, that's going into a whole other political realm. But, we are in a presidential election year here in the United States. And you talked about before all the different aspects of, infrastructure and how urban planning is laid out. And what do you want people to think about, when they watch Black Madonna? What kind of issues and what do you want people to be mindful of after watching this film and going into the election and the issues that they're going to come up against and hear from candidates?
Mhm.
I want them to understand that place is just as much of a character as human beings are. Place shapes how we navigate the world. Place shapes our psychology, our decision making. It shapes how we form community, how community falls apart. And I think that's so important because America is such a big place. And I think it's easy, especially if you live in cities, to be in a vacuum with just like, okay, my neighborhood, you know, these couple of blocks and all that. But what I hope is that when people see the story of Aziza, that they see a rippling effect, and that this is one story, but there can be many different stories across America. We see it with oil spills in Louisiana. We see it with factories in in wine mining towns in West Virginia. We see all these different things that are happening, but aside from the economic downturn, what is that doing to the people? Right. And so that's what I hope. I hope that when people watch the film that they pay attention to the atmospheric elements of all that's going on, from the heat to the noise, to the lack of trees when she's commuting here and there, but there's all these plants where she's working, the rain. Like, I hope that they pay attention to all these different things, because this just enhances the story itself.
Yeah. I want to say that I didn't know this until recently, but in Paris or in France, on March 4th, France became the only nation to guarantee the right to an abortion, and as it's in the Constitution, it's officially constitutional. And in an election year, yeah, when things seem so tenuous in the United States, I think it's it's hopeful, but it's also bitter. It's bittersweet considering that our human rights are so tenuous right now in the States.
Yeah. And I
But
believe
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, I think. I hope. I want to be hopeful.
I think it's important to have that element of hope in whatever way we can, and film has the opportunity to allow audiences to do that. You know, you're talking about Aziza having that moment of hope at the end of the film, and you know, there are ways that we can dig into our own communities and our own networks and help each other. So I think that's something that's very reflective of the story that we see in Black Madonna. Well, where can people look out for Black Madonna as you're gearing up to get it out there, and festivals and screenings and all of that? Like you mentioned, where can people keep up with the journey of Black Madonna, and where can they follow both of you?
So you can keep up with me on just my Twitter handle is Morgan Jerkins. My Instagram is underscore Morgan Jerkins, and so I'll be updating a lot of my personal pages of what's going on Black Madonna.
Yeah, likewise, you can follow me at Zorita Pepita on Instagram, and we will have links to Black Madonna on our socials, so you can follow along on the journey.
I love it. And we'll put all the social links in our show notes as well. And finally, what gives you both hope for the future?
Oh wow, that's a big question. I think what gives me hope for the future is community. Like, I think that we've seen a lot of destabilizing things that have happened in our society in the past 4 years, but even beyond that. But I think it's the ways in which people have come together have been really inspiring for me, whether it's free libraries, small libraries on the street, whether it's community fridges, um, block parties, Narcan testing, for when you want to go party safely, like all of these different things, the ways that people show up for each other, that doesn't have to do with carcerality, that doesn't have to do with subjugation or censorship. Those are things that inspire me and give me hope.
I'm inspired by women that I follow online. Like women, millennial aged women that that there are a lot that I look up to on social media. I find them to be like such a balm in such a difficult time. Um, Really inspired by like particularly like Black female artists online. Personally, I'm inspired by my female friends, the ones that are staunchly child free and the ones that are new moms. I have a niece my friend is 9 months pregnant, and my niece is about to be born, and I couldn't be more excited. I'm just like inspired by women, the women around me who are making bold choices, whether or not they very much do not want children, or ones that are like they're going to nurture incredible children and bring in a new generation of wonderful people. Yeah, I'm just inspired by the women that I meet.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm inspired by the work you're both doing, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And we are so excited to be sharing Black Madonna with the Repro Film community these couple of months. So thank you, Morgan and Zora, for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can watch Black Madonna this month by heading to reprofilm.org and subscribe to our free periodical to receive a whole host of Repro Film goodies straight to your inbox every month. I'm talking every episode of this podcast, a short film, a playlist, organizations to support, links to resources, and other bite-sized pieces of repro advocacy. You can also check out the links in the show notes to follow Morgan and Zora on social media. Be sure to share this podcast with a friend and help us spread the Repro Film mission, which is all about centering bodily autonomy through storytelling, film, and conversation. The Repro Film podcast is executive produced by Mama Film, hosted and produced by me, Asha Dyer, edited by Kylie Brown, with original music by Paris Jane and Maurice Anthony. The periodical is programmed by Neha Aziz and written by Emily Christensen. You can find us on social media at ReproFilm on Instagram and watch our additional video content on our YouTube channel at reprofilm.org. I'm your host, Asha Dyer, and I look forward to bringing you our next podcast episode. Bye for now.